I was sitting at my kitchen table when I opened my daughter's email, and in one short, cold paragraph, she cut me out of her wedding like I was nothing more than a stranger. No warning, no phone call, not even a kind word to soften the blow. Just lines on a glowing screen telling me that because of guest count restrictions, I wasn't going to be welcomed at the most important day of her life. Instead, she suggested I could watch it online through a live stream. Can you imagine that? Being told that the child you carried, raised, sacrificed for, could walk down the aisle with her father-in-law proudly in the front row, but her own mother would be reduced to some faceless viewer behind a laptop screen. That moment, I swear, it felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I sat there staring at the words again and again, thinking maybe I'd misread them, maybe there was a mistake. But no, it was all there in plain text, polite but dismissive, like an eviction notice from my own family. I didn't cry, not right then, and I didn't call her back, didn't beg her to reconsider. Instead, I sat very still, my hands wrapped around the cooling mug of coffee I had poured earlier, and I let the silence of my kitchen swallow me whole. The world outside was carrying on like nothing had changed. Cars passing down the street, the faint hum of the neighbor's lawnmower, the smell of rain clinging to the morning air. But for me, time stopped. You know those moments where your heart splits open but no sound comes out? That was me. For 59 years, I had held myself together, built a life out of sacrifice, discipline, love, and quiet resilience. And in one email, my daughter tore it apart. Before I go any further, let me tell you who I am, because maybe then you'll understand why this cut so deep. My name is Mary Collins. I've lived in Oregon my whole life. I'm a widow. My husband passed when our kids were still teenagers. And since then, I've carried the weight of being both mother and father. I've worked at the same law firm as an office manager for nearly 20 years. I'm not rich, but I've always been careful, always made sure there was food on the table, a roof over our heads, and that my kids never felt the absence of opportunities. My daughter Sarah is 32 now. My son Luke is 29. I raised them on my own, pouring everything I had into making sure they were safe, supported, and never went without. There were nights I stayed up until 2 a.m. balancing bills and stretching paychecks. Nights I cried quietly in the shower so they wouldn't hear me breaking down. I gave up vacations, promotions, even dating again, because I thought my children deserved stability more than I deserved companionship. And honestly, I never resented it. Not once. Seeing them graduate, helping them through breakups, moving them into their first apartments, I thought those were the rewards, the small victories that made the sacrifices worth it. I thought that when Sarah walked down the aisle, I'd be right there, holding her hand before she passed it into another's. But life has a cruel way of reminding you that expectations don't always align with reality. The thing is, this wasn't just about one email. This wasn't just about one wedding. This was about a pattern, years of me giving everything and slowly being treated more like a transaction than a mother. And the more I sat there at my kitchen table, the more it sunk in. The irony was almost unbearable. I was supposed to be funding that wedding. $50,000 I had quietly arranged to transfer to make sure my daughter had the celebration she dreamed of. $50,000 I saved over years thinking it would go towards something we could both look back on with pride. But now, apparently, my role was reduced to little more than a bank account. Unwanted in person, but expected to foot the bill. I remember staring at the email header again. Her name, her fiancé Andrew CC'd in, like this was just a formal business update. And the tone, God, it was so dismissive. No warmth, no apology, just a sterile explanation about guest count restrictions and venue capacity issues. But I knew the truth. Andrew's mother had always had a way of whispering poison into Sarah's ear, making her believe that I was too overbearing, too opinionated, too much of a reminder of a life Sarah wanted to leave behind. I could feel her fingerprints all over that email. And in Sarah's clipped sentences, I could almost hear her future mother-in-law's voice, making sure I stayed on the outside looking in. So, what do in a moment like that? Do you scream? Do you call your child and demand answers? Or do you sit in silence, like I did, holding all your years of sacrifice in one hand and all your heartbreak in the other, realizing the scales have tipped against you? I'll ask you honestly, what would you have done in my shoes? Because as I sat there, my mind went back through every moment, every sacrifice I had made. Paying for Sarah's college tuition when she decided to change majors halfway through. Co-signing her first car loan, even though it stretched my credit thin. Covering her rent after she lost a job. Quietly wiring money she never repaid. Never once did I keep score. Never once did I say no. But now, when it came to including me in her happiness, she had no hesitation saying no to me. I didn't reply to that email. Not that day. I let it sit there in my inbox like a wound that refused to close. Later, when my phone buzzed with Sarah's follow-up texts and missed calls, I ignored them. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses, wasn't ready to be gaslit into believing this was somehow reasonable. And when Luke, my son, eventually heard about what had happened and called me, his words didn't bring comfort either. He told me maybe I was overreacting, maybe Sarah had no choice. But deep down, I could hear it. He was siding with her because it was easier, because it was safer than siding with me. That's when I knew. I was on my own. Again. And maybe that's when the seed was planted. Revenge isn't always a fiery explosion in the moment. Sometimes it's a quiet decision, a steady simmer that builds over days and weeks until you realize you're done being taken for granted. At that kitchen table, staring at that email, I didn't know yet exactly what I'd do. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to pay for a wedding I wasn't welcome at. The morning after that email, I woke up before dawn like I usually do, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the small desk tucked in the corner of my living room. For years, this little space had been where I paid bills, wrote letters, and managed every detail of our household finances. It was where I'd stretched dollars into meals, where I'd balanced rent against utilities, where I'd learned to be both mother and provider. But that morning, sitting in front of my laptop, my hands didn't shake the way they had the night before. No, there was a new kind of steadiness, a new kind of calm that only comes after a storm has passed and left you with clarity. I opened the banking portal, scrolled down to the pending transfer of $50,000, and hovered my cursor over the cancellation button. I thought about the years it had taken me to save it, skipping vacations, ignoring new clothes, saying no to myself again and again. I thought about how excited Sarah had been when she realized I was covering the venue in Napa Valley, and how she had called me crying with gratitude. And then I thought about the email. Cold, sterile, cutting. That was enough. With a single click, I canceled the wire. The money stayed right where it belonged, safe in my account, not funding the celebration I wasn't welcome to attend. I can't describe the rush that followed. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was something heavier, sharper, like reclaiming a part of myself I had been giving away for too long. For once, I wasn't saying yes out of guilt or obligation. For once, I was saying no and meaning it. I closed my laptop, sat back in the chair, and let myself breathe. By noon that same day, my phone started buzzing. At first, it was Sarah, a cheerful voice message about some final wedding details. Then another one, her voice slightly more rushed, asking if I had heard from the venue. By evening, the tone had shifted completely. The messages became frantic. Mom, the deposit didn't go through. The venue's saying the payment was reversed. What's going on? Did the bank mess something up? Call me back. Please, this is serious. I didn't answer. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, something I rarely did alone, and sat by the window as the rain tapped softly against the glass. My silence was louder than any words I could have said. For years, I had filled every silence with comfort, reassurance, explanations. But not this time. The next morning, the calls doubled. Sarah, then Andrew, then even Luke. My son's voice on the voicemail was sharp, accusing. "Mom, Sarah's panicking. Why would you mess with the wedding funds now? You know how much this means to her. Just fix it, okay?" I remember shaking my head as I listened. Fix it? As if my only role was to fix their problems, no matter the cost to me.
But let me tell you something. When people have gotten used to your sacrifices, your boundaries feel like betrayal to them. And that was exactly what was happening. For years, I had played the part of the fixer, the rescuer, the quiet backbone of this family. And the first time I said no, suddenly I was the villain. That night, Sarah sent an email. This one wasn't sterile. It was dripping with desperation. Paragraph after paragraph of pleas, bargaining, half apologies. She told me she understood it must hurt not to be included, but that I had to see the bigger picture, that I was overreacting, that I couldn't let emotions ruin her big day. She said Andrew's parents had already told people about the Napa Valley venue, that canceling now would be humiliating. She begged me to think of her, not myself. Do you see the irony? After reducing me to nothing but a live stream viewer, now suddenly I was supposed to remember it wasn't about me. I read that email slowly, sipping tea, letting every word sink in. But instead of replying, I simply archived it. Gone from my inbox, gone from my mind. A few days later, Luke showed up at my doorstep. My sweet boy, who had once cried in my arms after his first heartbreak, who I had held through fevers and failures, now stood there with frustration in his eyes. "Mom," he said, "you're being difficult. You know this isn't about you. Sarah's just stressed. Can't you just..." "Just what?" I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "Just pay for a wedding I'm not even allowed to attend? Just keep quiet while I'm discarded like a stranger? Tell me, Luke, would you write a check to someone who slammed the door in your face?" He flinched, but he didn't answer. He tried again, softer this time. "It's just one day. Don't make this bigger than it is." But that was the point. It wasn't just one day. It was every day leading up to this. Every sacrifice erased, every kindness overlooked. I stood there, my hand gripping the edge of the doorframe, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't back down. "Luke," I said, "I love you both, but I won't be treated like this anymore. Not by Sarah, not by you. If she doesn't want me there, then she doesn't get my money there either." He left without hugging me, his shoulders tense, his jaw tight, and I watched him walk to his car, knowing that in his eyes, I had become the problem. The fallout came quickly after that. With the payment gone, the venue in Napa canceled the booking. Word spread among Sarah's friends and Andrew's family. Deposits for catering, photography, even the band were lost. The dream wedding unraveled thread by thread. And all the while, my phone kept buzzing with messages. Angry ones, pleading ones, guilt-tripping ones, but I stayed silent. Do you think that was cold of me? Be honest. Would you have caved? Because I knew if I gave in once, they would never respect me again. One evening, exhausted from the flood of calls, I sat across from my boss Robert in the quiet of a little Italian restaurant. He had noticed my silence at work, the way my smile didn't quite reach my eyes, and he insisted on taking me out for dinner. Over steaming bowls of pasta, I told him everything. The email, the money, the confrontation with Luke. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, he just listened. And when I finally trailed off, embarrassed by how much I had unloaded, he put down his fork and said, "Mary, sometimes the strongest thing you can do for the people you love is stop letting them use you." That sentence stuck with me. Strongest thing. Not cruelest, not coldest, strongest. It reframed everything. Maybe saying no wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was love, twisted into a form my children weren't ready to understand. As I drove home that night, I realized something important. For years, I thought my worth was measured by how much I gave, how much I endured. But maybe, just maybe, my worth was in knowing when to stop. And by canceling that transfer, I had finally stopped. The days that followed felt like watching a storm batter a house from the safety of higher ground. I wasn't untouched by it. Believe me, my heart was raw and bruised. But for the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to patch the leaks and hold up the walls. That role had always been mine, the fixer, the one who rushed in with tape and glue and sacrifice. But now I sat in my quiet home, the phone buzzing endlessly on the counter, while Sarah's world shook without my hand to steady it. The wedding unraveling was almost surreal to witness from a distance. The Napa Valley venue released the date to another couple. The caterers kept the non-refundable deposit. The photographer, booked a year in advance, crossed Sarah's name off her calendar. Piece by piece, the dream Sarah had crafted came apart, and with it, so did her composure. The first messages were sharp with anger, accusations that I had ruined her life, that I had humiliated her in front of Andrew's family, that I was selfish. But anger gave way to pleading. Long, rambling emails where she reminded me of the times I had been there for her, almost like she was throwing my own sacrifices back in my face to guilt me into one more. She begged me to reconsider, said they could maybe book a smaller venue if I just released some of the funds. She promised I wouldn't have to watch from a live stream after all, that she'd find me a seat. But even then, I knew it wasn't about wanting me there. It was about wanting my money. What would you have done in my place if your child, who had just cut you out of her joy, came crawling back, not with humility, but with desperation for your wallet? Would you have caved? I'll admit, there were moments, late at night, lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, when I felt that old tug in my chest. The mother in me, the part that had always rushed to soothe and fix, whispered, maybe just help her, maybe just let this go. But then I'd remember the email, the cold dismissal, and I'd feel my jaw tighten. No, enough. It was around this time that I got an unexpected knock on my door. When I opened it, I was stunned. Standing there on my porch with the same warm smile I remembered from years ago was Sophia, Sarah's best friend from childhood. She had grown into a beautiful, confident woman, but the kindness in her eyes hadn't changed. "Hi, Mrs. Collins," she said softly, holding a cup holder with 2 coffees. "Can I come in?" I hadn't seen her in years, not since college days when she and Sarah drifted apart. But I welcomed her in like she had just left the house yesterday. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I had first read that fateful email, and she pushed one of the coffees toward me. "I hope you like vanilla lattes. You used to drink them all the time when I stayed over." That simple gesture, remembering something so small, nearly broke me. It had been so long since anyone brought me something without expecting something in return. Sophia looked at me, her expression both careful and sympathetic. "Sarah's in a spiral," she said finally. "She's been calling everyone, crying, blaming Andrew, blaming you, blaming herself. I wanted to hear your side because, well, I don't think you're the villain she's making you out to be." I couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped me. Villain? That's new. I suppose in her story, I'm the wicked mother who destroyed her fairy tale. Sophia shook her head. "No, I think she's scared. Scared because she thought she could control everything, and now she realizes she can't. And honestly, Mrs. Collins, I think she's realizing how much she's leaned on you without ever really appreciating you."
Her words sank into me like sunlight through cracks in a shutter. Finally, someone saw it. Someone understood. I loved her so much. I still do. But she disinvited me, Sophia. She asked me to watch her wedding on a live stream. And after everything, after years of putting her and Luke before myself, I couldn't do it anymore. Sophia reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. You've done more than enough. If she can't see that yet, that's on her, not you. For a long time, we sat there in silence, sipping our lattes. It felt strange, almost healing, to have someone from Sarah's own world validate what I had been feeling. It wasn't just me against the narrative Sarah was spinning. There was at least one voice in her orbit who could see the truth. Later, after Sophia left, I found myself standing at the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. I thought about the little girls Sarah and Sophia used to be, giggling in sleeping bags on my living room floor, whispering secrets late into the night. Back then, I was the mom who made them popcorn, who drove them to school dances, who listened when they fought about silly things. How had we gone from that warmth to this cold estrangement? The answer, I realized, wasn't simple. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to compromise my self-respect just to rewind time. The messages from Sarah kept coming. She tried every tactic: anger, guilt, sweet words. At one point, she even offered to negotiate, saying she'd let me come to the wedding if I at least covered the catering, as if my place at my own wedding was a bargaining chip, something to be purchased with money. That stung the most. That was the moment I truly saw the shift. Somewhere along the line, I had gone from being a mother to being a transaction. And let me tell you, that realization burned. It burned through the sorrow, through the guilt, through the temptation to give in. It hardened into something steadier. Resolve. If I caved now, if I bought my way back into her wedding, then I'd be telling her it was okay to treat me like a checkbook with a pulse. And it wasn't okay. Not anymore. I know some of you listening might wonder if I regretted canceling that wire, if I missed a chance at reconciliation. But the truth is, every plea that came in only confirmed I had made the right choice. Not one message said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I love you. I want you there because you're my mother." No, every message was about the money, the image, the embarrassment. And in the silence of my little house, I realized something powerful. Sometimes the absence of the words you need to hear is the answer itself. That night, I cooked myself a simple dinner, poured a glass of red wine, and ate slowly at the table. No phone, no noise, just me. And in that quiet, for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Peace. The weeks that followed were like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Every call I didn't answer, every email I archived, pushed Sarah further into a corner she hadn't prepared for. You see, she had built her fairy tale wedding on the foundation of my sacrifice, and when I quietly pulled that foundation out, the whole structure came tumbling down. At first, I heard through mutual friends that Sarah and Andrew were scrambling to secure another venue. The Napa Valley dream had slipped through their fingers, but there was talk of a winery in Washington or maybe a garden in Portland. Nothing as glamorous, but respectable enough to save face. Except the problem with weddings isn't just the venue, it's the ripple effect. When one vendor cancels, others don't always wait around. The caterer took another booking. The band didn't refund the deposit. The photographer stopped answering calls. Every time Sarah tried to stitch the plan back together, another seam ripped apart. I didn't watch this with glee, the way you might expect in a revenge story. No, it hurt. She's my daughter, and watching her dreams collapse should have broken me. But there was also a strange justice in it, a balance I had never seen before. For once, I wasn't the one paying the price. For once, the consequences weren't mine to carry. Her messages shifted again. One morning, I woke to a long email where she painted pictures of a new plan, an intimate ceremony with only close family and friends, something simple but beautiful. She insisted it could still be special, still memorable, if only I would contribute again. She wrote, "Mom, I've been thinking, maybe I was too harsh. Of course I want you to be there. I don't know what got into me, but I need your help to make this happen." Those words should have softened me, right? They should have tugged at the maternal instinct I had spent a lifetime following. But when I read them, all I could hear was a child bargaining with consequences, not apologizing for cruelty. Notice what was missing. There was no true apology, no admission of the pain she had caused by excluding me in the first place. It wasn't about love. It was about salvaging her image, salvaging her day. And once again, my place was conditional on my bank account. I didn't reply. Not that day, not any day. And with every silence, I felt stronger. Around this time, Luke came by again, this time less angry and more bewildered. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table that had become the stage for all of this, and said, "Mom, she's a wreck. Andrew's furious. His parents are embarrassed. Sarah's crying every night. Do you really want it to end like this?" I looked at him carefully. "Luke, do you know what it felt like to open an email from your sister telling me I wasn't welcome at her wedding?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I know it was wrong, but she was under pressure. You know how Andrew's mom can be." I leaned forward. "So I should excuse her? I should keep funding a wedding where my presence depends on whether or not it's convenient for her fiancé's family? Luke, let me ask you, when you get married one day, are you going to tell me I can only come if I cover the flowers?" His silence was answer enough. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I hate seeing this family break apart." And that's when I said something I had been holding back for years. "Luke, the family broke apart a long time ago. You just didn't see it because I was always the one holding the pieces together." That conversation ended quietly. He left with more weight on his shoulders than he came with, but I didn't chase after him. I couldn't, not anymore. Word eventually reached me that Sarah and Andrew went ahead with a smaller ceremony, a courthouse followed by a dinner with his family. I wasn't invited, not even a token gesture, not even after all the begging for money. She made her choice, and this time she stuck with it. When I first heard, I thought I might crumble, but instead I sat in my living room, the soft light of evening falling across the walls, and I felt something close to peace. It wasn't joy, not satisfaction exactly, but closure. They had wanted me out, and now I was truly out. And the world hadn't ended. I was still here. I was still breathing. One evening, when the air smelled of pine and the rain had just cleared, I found myself sorting through old emails on my computer. There it was, Sarah's final note, buried under dozens of desperate pleas. This one wasn't long, just a curt acknowledgement that the wedding had happened, that things hadn't gone as planned, but that she was moving on. No apology, no warmth, just words that read like a business transaction closing its books. I stared at that email for a long while. Part of me wanted to respond, to write a long letter pouring out the ache in my chest, demanding recognition for everything I had done. But another part of me, the stronger part, knew it wouldn't change anything. I clicked archive, and just like that, it was gone. Not deleted, not erased, just put away, where it couldn't sit in my inbox like an open wound. Do you know that feeling when you finally put something heavy down after carrying it for so long you'd forgotten how much it weighed? That's what it felt like. For years, I had carried the weight of being the fixer, the provider, the endless giver. And with one click, I realized I didn't have to anymore. In the weeks after, my life became quieter, but also clearer. I still went to work, still managed files and schedules for the law firm, but there was a shift inside me. I started taking my lunch breaks outside instead of at my desk. I went on long walks, just listening to the crunch of leaves beneath my shoes. I even signed up for a painting class at the local community center, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. And you know what? It felt good. Strange at first, almost indulgent, but good. Every so often my phone would buzz with a message from Sarah. Not angry, not pleading anymore, just updates. Pictures of her and Andrew, little snippets of a life I wasn't part of. I didn't reply. I wasn't cruel enough to block her, but I wasn't desperate enough to chase her either. And in that silence, I started to understand something I had never allowed myself to believe before. Loving my children didn't mean burning myself to ashes for their comfort. Loving them didn't mean emptying my bank account or swallowing disrespect just to keep peace. Sometimes, the strongest love you can give is the love that says, no more. The funny thing about silence is that it creates space, and when you've spent a lifetime filling every gap with apologies, with effort, with sacrifice, it can feel terrifying at first. But once the fear eases, silence becomes something else. It becomes possibility. And that's where Robert came back into the picture. One evening, I was leaving the office late. The sky had that soft lavender hue it gets just before dark. And as I walked toward my car, I saw him leaning against his truck, waiting. For a moment, I froze. Part of me thought maybe he'd grown tired of my stubborn independence and was here to scold me for letting things fall apart. But when he looked up and smiled, I saw none of that. "Thought you might want dinner," he said, holding up a takeout bag for my favorite Thai place. I couldn't help but laugh. "You're too good to me, Robert." We ended up eating in the break room, the hum of the vending machine filling the spaces between our words. I told him everything, about Sarah's smaller wedding, about Luke's torn loyalties, about the hollow ache I couldn't quite name. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions. He just listened, really listened, in a way I had forgotten people could. When he finished, he leaned back and said, "Mary, you've spent your whole life proving yourself worthy of scraps. Scraps of respect, scraps of gratitude, scraps of love. When are you going to start asking for the whole meal?" That question stuck with me. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't pity. It was a challenge. A challenge to stop treating myself like a secondary character in my own story. I didn't answer him right then. I wasn't ready. But the seed was planted. Over the next few weeks, Robert became something I hadn't realized I needed. A mirror. He didn't tell me who I was. He reflected back who I could be. The way he treated me with patience and dignity made me question why I had settled for less from the people I loved most. One Saturday, we went for a drive out along the coast. The ocean stretched wide and endless beside us, the waves crashing against cliffs like a reminder that even the strongest walls could be reshaped over time. I remember staring out the window, the salty wind tangling my hair, and whispering, "Do you think I was wrong to cut her off?" Robert didn't hesitate. "No, you gave her everything, and she decided it wasn't enough. That's not on you. That's on her." "But she's my daughter. A mother's supposed to—" He cut me off gently. "A mother is supposed to love, not destroy herself." That conversation replayed in my mind for days afterward. For so long, I had equated motherhood with martyrdom. Every sleepless night, every second job, every compromise. I thought that's what made me a good parent. But maybe, just maybe, a good parent was someone who modeled self-respect. Someone who showed her children that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's servitude. The shift wasn't instant. Healing never is. But little by little, I started reclaiming pieces of myself. I rearranged my house, not to make space for others, but to make it mine. I pulled old paintings out of the closet and hung them on the walls. I started wearing the bright scarf Robert once complimented, instead of keeping it tucked away for special occasions. And each time I chose myself, the guilt that had once felt suffocating grew a little lighter. Luke noticed one night he stopped by unannounced, and as he looked around my living room, he said, "Mom, you seem different." I smiled softly. Maybe I'm finally just being myself. He sat across from me, fiddling with his keys. I don't know how to navigate this. Sarah's angry all the time. Andrew doesn't even mention you anymore. It feels like I'm stuck between two worlds. I reached out and took his hand. Luke, you don't have to choose sides. Loving your sister doesn't mean you're betraying me. But I need you to understand something. I won't go back. Not to the way things were. If Sarah wants me in her life, it has to be on different terms. Respectful terms. Otherwise, I'm okay watching from the sidelines. He nodded, though I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wasn't ready to accept it fully, but he heard me. And for the first time, I felt like my voice carried weight, not just for him, but for me. In the quiet after he left, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't been about making Sarah suffer. It had been about reclaiming the power I had given away so freely. By refusing to fund her conditional love, I wasn't just punishing her, I was freeing myself. Robert and I continued to spend time together, not as saviors or martyrs, but as equals. We laughed, we argued about silly things like which diner had the best coffee. We walked hand in hand through farmers markets. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged in my own life. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in gold, I stood on my porch with a cup of tea and thought about Sarah. I pictured her in her new life, married, maybe planning a family of her own, and I whispered into the fading light, I hope you learn what I've learned. I hope you understand one day that love isn't something you barter. It's something you honor. And with that, I let go a little more. Not all at once, but enough to breathe, enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was finally living, not surviving. The thing about moving on is that it doesn't happen with a grand announcement or a sudden breakthrough. It sneaks in quietly, like sunlight slipping through the blinds after a long night. One morning I woke up and realized I wasn't reaching for my phone to check if Sarah had written. I wasn't holding my breath waiting for another email filled with accusations or empty apologies. Instead, I just got up. I made coffee. I watched the steam rise from the mug and thought, this is enough. But life has a funny way of reminding you that you're never entirely alone, even when you feel like it. Out of the blue, Sophia, Sarah's childhood best friend, showed up at my door one Sunday afternoon. I hadn't seen her in years, not since the days when she and Sarah would giggle in the kitchen, raiding my fridge after soccer practice. She looked older now, of course, but still carried that same warm energy. I hope it's okay that I came by, she said, holding a bag of pastries. I've been worried about you. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once read Sarah's rejection email, and shared coffee and cinnamon rolls. Sophia told me about how chaotic the wedding plans had become, how vendors were bailing left and right after the payment fell through, how Andrew's mother was quietly gloating over the mess. Sarah's panicked, Sophia admitted, shaking her head. But honestly, I think this might be the best thing for her. She's so wrapped up in appearances that she's forgotten who she is. Her words stung a little, but not because they were untrue. They stung because they reminded me of all the times I had protected Sarah from the natural consequences of her choices. I had always stepped in, always caught her before she could fall. And maybe, just maybe, this time she needed to hit the ground to learn how to stand. Sophia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, Mary, she said, I think you did the right thing. And I think Sarah will see that one day. It just might take longer than either of you would like. That visit stayed with me. It wasn't absolution, but it was validation. Someone who loved Sarah, someone who had seen her at her best and worst, believed that my decision wasn't cruelty, it was necessity.
From there, I started saying yes to more things outside my comfort zone. I joined a book club at the local library where we argued passionately about everything from Jane Austen to modern thrillers. I reconnected with an old coworker, Janice, who invited me to a pottery class. I even hosted a small dinner at my house with Robert and a couple of neighbors, filling the space with laughter instead of waiting for silence to swallow it. Each step felt like stitching a patch back into the quilt of my life. The holes left by rejection were still there, but they were no longer gaping wounds. They were part of a pattern, a reminder of both loss and resilience. Of course, the ache for my daughter never fully left. There were nights when I'd catch myself scrolling through old photos. Sarah in her prom dress, Luke blowing out birthday candles, the four of us at the beach before their father passed. I'd smile at the memories, but sometimes I'd also cry. And that was okay. I learned that healing didn't mean erasing the pain. It meant carrying it without letting it crush you. Robert was steady through it all. He never pushed me to move faster than I could, never tried to fix me. Instead, he walked beside me. One evening, we were sitting on a bench at the park, watching kids play tag under the fading sunlight. I sighed and said, "Do you ever think about the fact that some of the people we love most will never understand us?" He looked at me with those kind eyes and replied, "All the time. But I also think about how the people who do understand us are the ones worth building our future with." That hit me like a wave. For so long, I had been focused on the ones who didn't understand, on Sarah's dismissive tone, Luke's hesitation, Andrew's mother's disdain. I had been measuring my worth by the people who refused to see it, instead of embracing the ones who did. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Days turned into weeks, and soon it was clear that the grand Napa Valley wedding was dead in the water. The deposits were gone, the guest list had shrunk, and whispers reached me through Sophia that Sarah was planning something much smaller, more private. She never sent me an invitation, of course, and I didn't expect one. But instead of spiraling into grief, I felt a strange calm. It was as if a chapter had officially closed, not with fireworks, but with a quiet, steady turning of the page. I archived her last email without rereading it, not out of spite, but out of peace. I didn't need to hold on anymore. My evenings became my own again. I cooked meals I actually enjoyed instead of rushing something together for the kids. I took long walks, sometimes with Robert, sometimes alone, savoring the way the world felt new again. I found joy in small things, a neighbor's dog wagging its tail, the way the autumn leaves crunched under my shoes, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery downtown. And slowly, I began to understand something profound. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about reconstruction. It's about tearing down the version of yourself that allowed others to diminish you and building something stronger in its place. If you're listening to this and wondering whether I ever stopped loving my daughter, the answer is no. Love doesn't vanish overnight, but love without respect isn't enough. And for the first time in my life, I was brave enough to admit that. Would you have done the same in my shoes? Be honest. If your own child treated you like a wallet with no face, would you still fund their happiness? Or would you, like me, finally decide to invest in your own? Because here's the truth I learned the hard way. Sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away. Not for them, but for yourself. You'd think that once a decision is made, once the line is drawn, the hardest part is over. But in my experience, the real challenge comes in living with it afterwards, especially when others refuse to let it go. The first confrontation didn't come from Sarah herself. It came through Luke. One evening, he called and asked if he could stop by. His voice was tight, the kind of voice you use when you're carrying someone else's burden.
I told him, of course, and an hour later he was sitting in my living room, still in his work clothes, fidgeting like he was bracing for a storm. "Mom," he began, "I need to understand something. Did you really cancel The Wire? The whole thing?" I looked him in the eye and said, "Yes, I did." He groaned, running his hands through his hair. "Do you realize what you've done? They've lost almost everything. Deposits, catering, the venue. It's gone. And Sarah's—" She trailed off, shaking his head. "She's furious. She says you ruined her life." The words stung, though I had been expecting them. I took a deep breath before answering. "Luke, I didn't ruin her life. She made her choices. I simply refused to fund them when she decided I wasn't good enough to be there." He leaned forward, his voice rising. "But it's just a wedding. Maybe she made a mistake excluding you. Maybe it was Andrew's mom's idea. I don't know. But isn't this punishment a little extreme?" For a moment, I almost wavered. I almost reached for the old reflex, to explain myself, to justify, to backpedal. But then I remembered Robert's words. "When are you going to stop settling for scraps?" So I said calmly, "Luke, this isn't punishment. This is me refusing to bankroll my own erasure. If that's extreme, then maybe it says more about what you've all come to expect from me than about what I've actually done." His face fell, and for a second, I saw my little boy in him again, the one who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. He wanted so badly for me to undo the mess, to fix it the way I always had, but I couldn't, not this time. We sat in silence, the air thick between us. Finally, he muttered, "I don't know how to stand in the middle of this. She's my sister, but you're my mom. I don't want to lose either of you." I reached across and touched his hand. "You don't have to choose, Luke, but you do have to understand. I won't let myself be treated like a transaction anymore. If Sarah wants me in her life, she has to want me, not my money." He didn't argue after that. He just sat there, looking tired and defeated. And when he left, I cried. Not because I doubted myself, but because I knew my children were being pulled apart by a tension I hadn't created but could no longer absorb for them. A week later, I got another kind of confrontation. This time, it was through an unexpected knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Andrew's mother standing there, polished, smug, her lips curved in that tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Mary," she said sweetly, though the venom beneath it was unmistakable, "I thought we should talk." I wanted to slam the door in her face, but instead I let her speak. "It's really such a shame," she began, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Sarah was devastated. Andrew is humiliated. All those plans, all that money, gone. And all because you couldn't put your pride aside for one day." Her words burned, but I stood tall. It wasn't pride. It was self-respect. She scoffed. "Self-respect? You've torn your family apart. Do you really think Sarah will ever forgive you? Do you really think Andrew will allow her to?" I smiled faintly, though my hands were trembling. If their love depends on me being silent and subservient, then maybe it's not love worth keeping. Her eyes narrowed. "You've made a very powerful enemy in me, Mary." And with that, she swept out, her perfume lingering like poison in the air. I sank onto the couch, shaken but oddly relieved. Because that moment, that confrontation, crystallized everything. It wasn't just about Sarah. It wasn't even about Andrew. It was about a system I had fed into for years, a system where my worth was measured only in what I could give, never in who I was. And for once, I had said no. Word spread quickly after that. Family members called, some siding with me, others accusing me of being cold. Old friends sent messages, some encouraging, some judgmental. Everywhere I turned, it felt like people had opinions about a story that wasn't theirs to tell. But here's the strange part. The louder they got, the quieter I became inside. Not out of defeat, but out of clarity. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. I knew why I had done what I had done, and for the first time in my life, that was enough. The fallout continued, of course. Sarah sent frantic emails alternating between rage and begging. "How could you do this to me?" one message read. Another, "Please, Mom, we can still fix this if you just send the money." The desperation dripped from every word, but I didn't reply. Not because I didn't love her, but because I did, and I finally understood that enabling her wasn't love at all. Do you think I was cruel for staying silent? Be honest with yourself. If someone treated you like a disposable accessory, would you still empty your savings for their dream? Or would you, like me, finally say, enough? Because here's what I realized. Sometimes the only way to teach people how to value you is to stop giving them the chance to devalue you. And as painful as it was to watch my daughter's world crumble, I knew deep down it wasn't me who had set the fire. I had simply stopped pouring fuel on it. The day of the ceremony came and went without me. I only knew the exact date because Sophia, bless her, quietly let it slip in a message the week before. "Don't feel bad," she wrote. "It's not what she dreamed of. It's small, awkward, and rushed. But I thought you might want to know." I did want to know, not because I planned to crash it, not because I sat around bitterly marking the hours, but because I needed to acknowledge it for what it was, the turning of a page in my daughter's life that no longer included me. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Instead of dressing in something solemn or curling up in self-pity, I put on a sundress and walked down to the farmer's market. The world didn't pause just because my child was saying vows without me. The peaches were still sweet, the flowers still fragrant, the vendor still laughed and called out to regulars. Life moved forward, and so did I. But as I strolled between the stalls, I couldn't help but imagine her. I pictured Sarah in a white dress, maybe not the one she had dreamed of, but something borrowed or last minute. I pictured Andrew beside her, his smile strained under the weight of family politics and financial loss. I pictured Andrew's mother watching smugly, probably reveling in the fact that I wasn't there. And I pictured my absence like a shadow in the room, unspoken but undeniable.
Some part of me wondered if Sarah thought of me in those moments. Did she look around and notice the empty chair where her mother should have been? Did she feel even a flicker of regret for shutting me out? Or was she too caught up in the performance of it all to acknowledge the cost? I'll never know, and maybe that's for the best. When I got home later that afternoon, the house was filled with quiet sunlight. I set the flowers I'd bought in a vase, made myself tea, and sat at the kitchen table. The same table where months earlier I'd read the email that started all of this. But this time, the weight in my chest wasn't unbearable. It was acceptance. I thought about all the weddings I had attended in my life. Friends, cousins, neighbors, the ones that had been dripping with wealth, and the ones held in backyards with paper plates. And I realized something simple yet powerful. The event itself doesn't matter. The vows are what matter. The promises made in quiet between two people, far away from cameras and guest lists and centerpieces. And if my daughter couldn't see that enough to keep her own mother in the room, then perhaps this marriage wasn't about love as much as it was about image. That night, when I crawled into bed, there were no tears. Just a strange, steady calm. Closure isn't dramatic. It doesn't always come with fireworks or some big reconciliation scene. Sometimes closure is just the moment you stop checking your phone, stop rehearsing conversations in your head, stop bleeding for people who don't even notice the wound. A week later, the inevitable came. Another email. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The subject line was simple. We're married. The message was short, almost clipped. Mom, we went ahead with a small ceremony. It wasn't what I wanted, but it's done. I wish things could have been different. Maybe one day we can talk. Sarah. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but in the end, I didn't reply. What could I say? Congratulations felt hollow. I'm sorry felt false. And any attempt to explain myself again would be like shouting into the same void I'd been staring into for years. Instead, I clicked archive. Not delete, just archive. A way of tucking it away without holding it too close. A marker of where we stood. Robert asked me later if I regretted not writing back. I told him no. Not because I didn't love her, but because I finally understood that love doesn't always mean chasing. Sometimes love means waiting quietly until the other person is ready to meet you halfway, or accepting that they never will. And to my surprise, the world didn't crumble when I chose silence. The sun still rose, meals still tasted good, laughter still came. In fact, I began to feel lighter, freer, as if carrying less of her weight gave me back pieces of myself I'd forgotten. Over time, the silence became less like punishment and more like peace. Sarah's name stopped being a wound and started being just a word. The ache was still there, of course, but it no longer ruled me. I think that's what closure really is. Not forgetting, not pretending it never mattered. It's acknowledging the loss, carrying it with grace, and refusing to let it dictate every corner of your life. If you've ever been shut out by someone you love, you know what I mean. That moment when you stop asking, why me? And start asking, what now? It doesn't happen overnight, but when it does, it feels like taking your first full breath after being underwater. And here's what I want to ask you. Would you have gone to that smaller ceremony if the invitation had finally arrived? Would you have stood there, watching your daughter smile, pretending none of the hurt ever happened? Or would you, like me, have chosen the harder path to stay home, to let the silence speak for itself, and to begin again on your own terms? Because I'll tell you the truth, it wasn't easy, but it was right. After the smaller ceremony, life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known in decades. For years, I had measured my days in terms of who needed me, Sarah, Luke, the endless demands of work, the invisible ledger of favors and obligations. But now I measured my days differently, by the laughter I could summon on a quiet afternoon, by the aroma of bread baking in my oven, by the colors of leaves along the walking path that I had claimed as my own. It began with small acts of self-care. I signed up for a pottery class, something I had always wanted but postponed to drive children to soccer practice or help them move apartments. Feeling the clay cool and wet under my hands, shaping it into forms that weren't perfect but undeniably mine, I realized something I hadn't before. I could create for myself, not just for everyone else. Lunches with Robert became regular, more than casual gestures. They were conversations that reminded me I was worthy of companionship without sacrifice. He never pressured me into something I wasn't ready for, never expected me to be anything other than who I was. With him, I learned that trust and respect could coexist with joy, and that joy didn't require self-erasure. Friendships outside family began to bloom too. Sophia visited more often, her presence a gentle reminder that some people in Sarah's orbit could still see me clearly, not as a means to an end, but as a person of value. And the other women I met through book clubs and community classes, they didn't know my history, didn't care about my past sacrifices. They just saw me. And for the first time in a long time, I let them. The healing wasn't linear. There were nights when I sat alone with the silence and felt the sting of absence, the hollow ache of watching my daughter choose a life that excluded me. I remembered every birthday I had celebrated quietly after missing hers, every college tuition payment, every sacrifice that had gone unnoticed. And sometimes I would cry, but not like before. Those tears weren't a plea or a guilt-laden confession. They were simply an acknowledgement of what had been lost and what I had survived. Work, too, felt different. I managed files and schedules with the same dedication as always, but now I set boundaries. I refused extra hours that weren't necessary. I didn't let small irritations or workplace drama consume me. I discovered a surprising truth. People don't crumble when you stop overextending yourself. They adapt. And in the space I had carved out for me, I found not emptiness, but breathing room.
One day, while walking through the neighborhood, I met a neighbor I had known for years, but never spoken to much. We exchanged greetings, then conversation, and by the end of an hour, we were laughing over tea and biscuits on her porch. For the first time in decades, my world felt wider, filled with people who saw me without expectation, without judgment, without using me as a prop in their own stories. Through all of this, I often reflected on what had happened with Sarah and the wedding, and slowly I understood that my refusal to fund her dream wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of self-respect. The emotional labor, the financial strain, the constant giving without acknowledgement, it had all accumulated into a burden I could no longer bear for someone who saw me only as a utility. Would you have had the courage to stop giving when giving no longer meant love? To say no when your heart was screaming yes, just to preserve your own dignity? I'll be honest, it was terrifying at first, but with every step I took in my own life, the fear receded, replaced by clarity. I started journaling my thoughts, sketching out moments that mattered, writing letters I never intended to send. It was a way to process the anger, the grief, and the quiet victories. I wrote about Sarah, about Luke, about Andrew, about all the moments that had hurt and haunted me. But I also wrote about myself, the parts that had been ignored, the desires I had postponed, the joy I had stifled. And in writing, I found perspective. Perspective taught me something I hadn't fully grasped before. Self-love isn't selfish. Protecting your own boundaries isn't cruelty. In fact, sometimes it's the strongest act of love, not just for yourself, but for those around you. Because when you model respect for yourself, you teach others how to treat you. I remember one quiet evening, Robert and I sitting on my porch as the sky turned from gold to deep purple. I sipped tea and watched the wind stir the trees. "You've changed," he said softly. "I have," I admitted. I finally stopped letting other people define my value. I stopped trying to fix everything, to give everything. And you know what? Life feels lighter. He smiled, squeezing my hand. "It suits you. You're stronger now, not just in what you do, but in who you are." Strength. That word resonated with me. For decades, I equated strength with endurance, with carrying burdens silently, with sacrificing endlessly. But now I understood true strength is knowing when to stand firm, when to step back, when to choose yourself, even when it's hardest. Even with Sarah's absence, I felt empowered. I began investing in hobbies that brought me joy,
painting, hiking, and even volunteering at a local library, helping children discover worlds hidden in books. Each act, small as it seemed, reinforced that I was capable of happiness independent of anyone else's validation. Some nights, I still imagine Sarah, wondering if she'd ever recognize the depth of my love, the countless sacrifices made without complaint. But the sting had dulled. I didn't need her acknowledgement to validate my worth anymore. I didn't need her apology to reclaim my peace. That realization that my value existed independently was the most liberating gift of all. And so I lived my days fully, not waiting for approval, not hoping for reconciliation, not sacrificing my joy for appearances. I surrounded myself with people who saw me, cherished the quiet victories, and honored the boundaries I set. And in doing so, I discovered a truth that had eluded me for years. Sometimes the greatest love you can give is the love you give yourself. Would you have had the courage to do what I did? To step back, to let go, to finally claim the life that was always yours, even if it meant leaving others behind? It's not easy. It's not neat. But it is freeing. And in that freedom, I found a life richer than any I had spent decades trying to build for others at the expense of my own soul. The days after the wedding passed without fanfare, and in that quiet, I realized something extraordinary had happened. I had survived the storm, yes, but more than that, I had emerged differently. Not hardened, not bitter, not broken, but steady, resilient, and quietly victorious. I had finally stopped measuring my worth by someone else's acceptance and started seeing it in my own reflection. It wasn't revenge in the way people imagine, with dramatic confrontations or public humiliation. No, my revenge was quieter, subtler, and infinitely more satisfying. It was refusing to pour my life into a celebration that excluded me. It was reclaiming the money, the time, the energy, the heart I had given freely for decades. And it was seeing Sarah and Andrew navigate the consequences of their choices without me, stepping in to cushion every blow. That was my justice. Sometimes I caught glimpses of them through mutual friends or social media. The wedding, small and improvised, looked fine. But I knew better. I knew the chaos behind the smiles, the last-minute adjustments, the stress that hung in every hurried photograph. And when I imagined them frantic and scrambling, I didn't feel joy in their suffering. I felt calm. I felt release. Because for the first time, the burden wasn't mine to carry. Luke still visited occasionally, navigating the delicate balance between his sister's hurt and his mother's dignity. One afternoon, we sat in the living room sipping iced tea, watching the sunlight dapple the floor. He looked at me with that familiar hesitance and said, "I can't believe you did it. That you stopped yourself from giving them everything." I smiled. "Luke, I didn't stop myself. I finally gave to the person who deserved it most. Me." He nodded slowly, the weight in his chest easing just a little. "I get it now. It's hard to see it at first, but I get it."
And that's what it came down to, perspective. For years, I had lived in a world where giving equaled love, where sacrifice equaled worth. And for years, I had believed that if I stopped giving, I would stop loving. But now I understood that love has boundaries, respect has limits, and self-respect is the foundation on which all true relationships are built. One evening, as the sky burned with the colors of sunset, Robert and I took a walk along the Riverside Trail. The water mirrored the fiery sky, moving gently beneath the bridge where we paused. He slipped his hand into mine, and I realized that in all this time, I had forgotten how it felt to be wanted for simply being myself. "You've changed," he said, softly, almost reverently. "There's a light in you now that wasn't there before. It's beautiful." I looked out over the water, breathing in the crisp evening air. I had to change. I had to stop living my life as a shadow of what others expected. I had to find myself again. He squeezed my hand. "And did you?" "I think I am," I said, a smile tugging at my lips. "Every day, a little more. And I've learned something important along the way. Sometimes the strongest love you can give is the love you give yourself. Sometimes the only way to teach others how to value you is to stop giving them the chance to undervalue you." There was a silence, the kind that isn't awkward but full, like the pause between heartbeats. And in that silence, I felt a profound sense of peace. For decades, I had given endlessly, sometimes to the point of losing myself. But now I had reclaimed my life. My voice mattered. My choices mattered. My happiness mattered. I thought about Sarah, about the countless times I had supported her unconditionally, about the times I had cleaned up after her mistakes, smoothed over her heartbreaks, financed her ambitions, and I forgave myself for believing that love meant erasure. I forgave her, not because she asked, but because holding on to resentment would only weigh me down. Forgiveness wasn't for her. It was for me. If you've ever loved someone who rejected you, who treated your devotion as a given, you understand the gravity of that forgiveness. It isn't a sudden release. It's a gradual surrender of the expectation that they will ever recognize your worth. And in that surrender, you find freedom. Over the next months, life bloomed in ways I hadn't imagined possible. I painted landscapes and abstracts, some terrible, some beautiful, all undeniably mine. I hiked trails that left my lungs burning and my mind clear. I hosted dinner parties with friends who loved me without condition, and every night, as I closed my eyes, I felt a quiet satisfaction that no wedding, no financial contribution, no recognition from anyone else could have ever given me. Mary Collins, 59, widow, mother, survivor, still standing at her kitchen table, tea in hand, watching sunlight dance across the floor, breathing in a life reclaimed and a self finally honored. Sometimes the strongest love you can give isn't to someone else, it's to yourself. And in that love, I found everything.
If you enjoyed Mary's story, don't forget to subscribe for more. And in the comments, let me know where in the world you're watching from, your country and your city. I'd love to see how far these stories reach.